Hey everyone, we're now live for Reverse ETL versus iPaaS with our featured guest, Ben Lewinsky, who's the Director of Sales Operations at CultureAmp. We're going to give people a few minutes just to trickle in. Maybe don't grab your coffee if it's 7 p.m. where you are, but if you're in Australia, like Ben, definitely get your morning coffee. And in the meantime, we have a poll question for you. So go to the polls tab at the bottom and answer from a scale of 0% to 100%. How much do you trust the data in your business tools?
And Ben, while we wait for the people, I'll ask that question to you. Today at CultureAmp, how much trust do you put in the data that are in Salesforce and Co?
I think we've moved it up from about a 6 to an 8, I would say. I think there's a fair bit more work to do, but we feel pretty good about it right now.
Across all of them, or is there
I think
trust more?
Salesforce is certainly the higher end, and then I think depending on the outcome and the level of risk, I think it can go down a little bit. That's for sure. I think it goes a little down the other end when you get into tools like Intercom.
Is that something like a conscious decision, or something you're I wish I had time to fix it?
I think it's a level of risk and a association to the process. I think if we're trying to send automated message out based on somebody's product usage that impacts their price, I think the bar is pretty high, and we need to be a little bit more thorough around what we do there and how we check that. But if it's somebody in Intercom sending out a targeted message for feature adoption, I think the bar is a little bit lower. So I think we haven't really defined the spectrum. I mean, we sort of try to figure it out as we go along, but there certainly is a spectrum.
That sounds good. I mean, I'm excited to talk more about that when we can chat. But Katie, we'll talk a bit more before we get to that, I guess.
Yeah. So poll results are in. So 75% of people said 75% usually trustworthy, and 25% of people said 50%, kind of hit or miss. So as Ben said, kind of depends on the tool. Some of them may be more trustworthy than others, but it's good to hear that in general, your data is pretty good. Cool. So let's jump right in. Again, if you stay until the end, we'll give you a $20 DoorDash gift card through email, limited to one per person. Let's get started. So I'm Katie. I'm going to be your host for the day. I'm a product marketing manager at Census. You can also call me MC Flamingo, which is our mascot. Our featured speakers today are Ben and Sil. Ben, do you want to kick us off by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Ben. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia right now, and I work at CultureAmp. And my role is focused on sales operations, very much so, but definitely also lead the revenue systems team here, and have had a lot of experience with analytics teams, and so very familiar with Census and all of that.
Cool. And I'm Sil. Joined Census 2 years ago to lead everything go-to-market and operation. Previously, in my previous life, I led go-to-market and operation again at a company called Pusher. So I've scaled that from 6 people to 100 plus people. So I'm very familiar with that space. I'm passionate about this. And, I've known Ben for 3 years, 2 years, something like that, more or less pre-COVID, but it's a COVID friendship for sure, as they say. And, I'm looking forward to talk all things data and data integration with Ben.
Awesome. Thanks both. So today we're going to talk about really quickly how we define iPaaS and reverse ETL, the stages of data integration maturity, and then we'll have a live chat and Q&A with Ben and Sil. So if you have questions at any time, please do drop them in the chat box. We'll have plenty of time to go over your questions, workshop any of your data use cases or data issues, so don't hesitate to reach out. Cool. So really quickly, let's first talk over how we define iPaaS. What is that? So iPaaS stands for Integration Platform as a Service. They have hundreds or sometimes even thousands of pre-built connectors that help you connect your apps to each other. Popular iPaaS tools, like some of the logos on the slide, include Zapier, Workato, and Tray.io. Now, let's talk about what we mean by reverse ETL. If you're familiar with ETL, extract, transform, and load, reverse ETL is kind of like that, flipped around to the other side of the warehouse. What that means is tools like Census deliver data from the warehouse, your source of truth, to all of your business apps. So every business team has a 360-degree view of data in the tools that they're already using. And here's a quick side-by-side comparison of iPaaS versus reverse ETL. iPaaS is point-to-point, meaning that you're connecting individual apps to each other without a central source of truth. So this is really great for use cases where you just need to get data from point A to point B really quickly, but you might start to run into some problems with scalability, maintenance, or reliability when you start growing your business. On the other hand, reverse ETL is optimized for large-scale data syncs. It works off the hub and spoke model, where the single source of truth is your data warehouse at the center, and data radiates out from that. It's designed to provide the best performance and observability, but it requires you to adopt a warehouse-centric view of your data. And last slide here, the data integration maturity curve. So depending on where you are or where your organization is in your journey, you might have different needs and different use cases that require different kinds of data integration tools. So in the beginning, stage one, as a small company, native integrations built by apps themselves might work pretty well for your needs. But as you're growing, you're adding more SaaS apps, you're adding more business tools, they'll start talking over each other, and none of them have that real full 360-degree view of your customer data. In stage two, developing, iPaaS solutions can be really great here to provide a solid start, so you can start building data pipelines and connecting your apps together. And in stage three, centralized, here's where you really start organizing your data so you can do BI and reporting and analytics. Today, standardizing metrics using a source of truth is easier now than ever before because data warehouses and modern data stack tools are really accessible to anyone. And stage four, operational analytics. This is the stage that we strive for all of our customers to achieve at Census. So at mature organizations, your BI dashboards have the same consistent metrics as your SaaS apps, and business users are empowered to act and automate with trustworthy data in all of their tools. Great, so now that we're all on the same page with the way that we define these tools, let's jump into a live chat. So I'm passing the mic to Sil to chat with Ben, our guest of honor. And again, send any of your questions or data integration struggles in the chat box, and we'll workshop them together. Thanks. Over to you, Sil.
Sweet. I guess kind of like going back to the last slide we just saw, like, Ben, when you joined Culture Amp, like what, 3 years ago, like what stage was Culture Amp at? Like, if you think about it.
Yeah, I think it was kind of similar to your recent ads that you've been doing with Alexis, right? That's her name?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where we had the RevOps team sitting in San Francisco, and we were more or less at the back of a queue asking for some central teams back in Australia to help and support us get data into our core tools like Salesforce. We did have some warehouses, we did have some ETL tools, but I think we were rinsing through a lot of different types of warehouses and trying out all different sort of ETL tools. And it's been a long journey, I think. And I know one of my colleagues is on this call with me who helped out a lot with that one as well. But yeah, we really wanted to move to some of the more industry standard modern data stack tools. And on that journey, we went with Redshift as our central warehouse, changed over that a couple of years ago, and then brought on Fivetran, which is pretty standard for businesses like us. And then DBT was introduced, we were using the core product first, and then we have the cloud product for a couple of people as well. And then, yeah, I think I go back to 7 or 8 years ago being a Looker user all the way back then, writing out derived tables in LookML and thinking, it'd be lovely to have a tool, something like that can just take all this logic and place it somewhere else, and really hacking it all together. And I think it was this time 3 years ago, I was at OpStars, which is like a side event from Dreamforce, which Lean Data run. And I went to the tray booth and I said, hey, do you connect to Redshift? And they showed me something, but it didn't look all that nice. And then I'm not sure how, but then, well, actually, I think we figured it out. You found me in a Slack community called Wizards of Ops, and you and I got chatting. And then we brought on Census to solve a whole host of problems for us.
And so about culture, I'm like, did you have like you mentioned Trey, for example, right? You know, like 3 years ago, was it like a bunch of like Trey, Workato, Zapier, like kind of like to get data between, you know, you mentioned you have Salesforce, like I'm sure you had like a marketing tool. So what was kind of like the marketing tool
Yeah.
of choice there, right? Like was it Marketo? What was it?
It was certainly Salesforce was the main place where we wanted to send everything. There was a couple of other
Yeah,
ones, like
yeah,
the amount of legacy syncs projects that I think we've had. It's pretty remarkable. But yeah, there was a janky Python script somewhere that our product team managed to get some information to Salesforce.
yeah.
Very little oversight that the ops team had around the logic and how that worked and how we worked together, which was certainly challenging. And that was our main way to get data in. And then there was, even JavaScript in our product was pulling in Salesforce data and placing it into Com. It was very much like that diagram, I think, as you showed on the previous slide. So various different solutions and no unified strategy. And even we had Mulesoft for a little while doing some things as well.
What was the marketing tool that you used at the time?
HubSpot.
HubSpot.
Okay.
Yeah,
we're pretty big company for using HubSpot. I think we're approaching one of their biggest customers, that's for sure.
You still use HubSpot today?
Yeah.
Oh wow, okay. And so how did were you like connecting HubSpot to Salesforce, like from getting the data flowing? Okay, cool. Like,
Salesforce,
so,
bring it in. Yeah.
Like
get it over to HubSpot.
Like, what's the worst thing about the native connection of Salesforce HubSpot, I guess?
I mean,
at that time.
I think I've had this problem at every single software company I've had, but it's mapping your CRM to product accounts. Sometimes it's one-to-one, sometimes it's many-to-one, and because you're using that native integration in HubSpot and Salesforce, you're really only limited to communicating to your users in a way that's based on the CRM account. So I think that's kind of it. And then particularly with HubSpot, like the custom object support is very limiting. Same with the other marketing automation tools. You find yourself doing lots of aggregations just to get to one sort of use case on the marketing side. That's for sure.
I mean, we're a big HubSpot shop here at Census, right? Actually, across all fronts, like sales, marketing, and I'm trying to push down the road as much as possible the inevitable migration to Salesforce. So I'm actually being pretty pleasantly surprised at HubSpot, and they ship custom object like 18 months or something like that, right?
Yes.
Like is the Salesforce native integration like working with custom object nowadays? I mean, I'm literally curious here. Like
I don't know. We're not even doing it. No, everything we aggregate to the account level. And we've moved a lot of the customer communication to tools like Intercom as well, where we have a little bit more flexibility on that one.
Got it. And so you mentioned Intercom. Like, is there anything else? Like, do you use like any Zendesk, Gensight, like that, like the big player there, or like not really?
Yeah. So HubSpot for marketing automation, Salesforce for CRM. We brought on Vitally, which is a smaller customer success tool. There's the Catalyst of the world. There's the Gainsights, but I think we took a big bet on Vitally. That's paying off so far. Really enjoying working with them. And then Intercom for in-app communication, and Zendesk for our live chat. I would say that's the core ones, although I believe, shout out to Census who built us a custom front integration. We are using front, and we're powering lots of things with the data we're able to push into front thanks to Census.
So I guess like one thing that you mentioned there, it's on the slide, was like you've been there for a long time. Like you've seen those kind of like migration to tool. Like how do you do migration? Like when you adopt like, hey, we just bought Vitally. How do you get that story? I mean, I killed Salesforce Instant twice in my past because the migration was so horrible that we just kind of rebooted a brand new Salesforce instance, right? So like, what's your story there, I guess?
I mean, I'll pick from Vitally as the most recent one. The biggest decision that we had with Vitally was what was our account grain. Were we going to have Vitally be a tool where we're servicing product accounts, or we're servicing CRM accounts? The people who pay us money, and how do we want to group it like that? So that was our huge decision, and that comes from a real big deep dive into the tool and figuring out what are the pros and cons of going that way, and figuring out what is it good at, what is it bad at, and what are some things we need to be really careful of. So that's certainly it. It's, a lot of strategic planning on our side up front, because you make one bad decision early on and you've got to live with it for many years, particularly at our size. And the other big decision we made was, how are we going to do product data with a tool like Vitally? And it comes back to that spectrum, I think, where depending on how important or what are the stakes, what are the bad outcomes that can happen here. Because in my mind, you can give people raw product data, event streams into a tool like Vitally, and then you just don't know what's going to happen with that. There's going to be 20, 30, 40, 50 people at our company, at least, who are going to run with that information you give them and build reports that you don't know about, automations that you don't know about, use this information and show it to customers. And I think we're being very conscious and careful with what information we put in at a raw level. Maybe we embed Looker, we do embed Looker into Vitally, rather than actually having multiple sources of truth with Vitally reports. And we also are very careful with what aggregated metrics we put into Vitally as well.
So I mean that was kind of like a good segue to another question I had for you. Because so last week I was like at Upstar and someone asked me that question. It's like, hey, when you have like data all over the place, do you actually replicate the same data set across all of the tool, or do you say, we do everything in Salesforce, but then in Zendesk we only give you like 20% of 20% of the same fields there? And like honestly, I never really thought about this. Like like my answer was like kind of like, well, it depends on the stage of your company and like you said, like who is gonna like how much how much weapon, or like how much you're going to give them to shoot themselves in the foot. Sorry, that's what I was going to say, right? And so like, is that something that you agree with? Like, is that something you're doing, like you think about in that way at Culture? Like what's your stand on this question?
Yeah, it really depends on the outcome. And I think like our product analytics team is incredible. And one of the most powerful things, I don't think it should be left to the hands of our CS team to create, say, the metric for customer engagement, or how are they actually utilizing these features. And by giving all that raw product data to Vitally as a CS tool, for example, you then open that door to do it. And so why not capitalize on the expertise and the people who have great proximity to the data, so they're really knowledgeable about our product data, which is our product analytics team, and they build all these adoption metrics. And we don't want to replicate them, because by replicating them, we'll create a door to have multiple sources of truth, which nobody really likes in this space. So we actually embed a lot of it. And I think replicating has its use cases, but it really, really depends on what you want to do. And if you are replicating, I think these native integrations, sometimes you can't place a filter on what you put in. I think if you did Amplitude to Intercom natively, Amplitude will just send in all of your events into Intercom, and then you can't really put that in. Whereas if you have something like a Census sitting there where you can filter what type of events, you could say, I'm only going to put these 3 or 4 events because they're tier 1 and we trust them, we believe in them, and that you should be doing things off these ones. So that's some of the thinking that we do when we want to do that. And we're still not even sending in raw events to Intercom for that reason, I think.
Got it. And so like, I mean, we just talked about like, the width of the data here, like, certain columns and things like that. Like, do you also limit, is like every user is in Salesforce, for example? Like, do you kind of like replicate all of the users in Salesforce, or like there's like a threshold that goes into Salesforce, and how do you deal with that?
And that goes back to like that stage 1, those native integrations, right? I certainly know, what is it? Skill jar. There's so many native integrations who'll just say, we're going to send everything into Salesforce. And then you sitting there as a RevOps professional, you go, well, that's not great. I don't want that. So no, we don't. We put the most important ones in, and that's usually based on role-based access. Are they an admin? Are they doing important things that's important to us, so that our team knows about them in their source of record? But yeah, there's tools, the skill jar to Salesforce integration would put in all of our users. And if you think about all users of Culture Amp, that's a lot of survey takers, a lot of people doing performance reviews, and there's a lot of people that you don't want into your system. So having that threshold to be only the important ones is pretty critical.
Vincent in the chat asked a great question. He's asking basically, how do you start transitioning from like the kind of like messy point-to-point graph to like more like a hub and spoke model in a budget-friendly way? And his current stack is Salesforce, HubSpot, Outreach, Plan Hat, Intercom, which feel like very the baseline up stack, I would say nowadays. So like what's the recommendation you have for him? And also ask him question. He's still in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, Sil, you're going to know this better than me because you probably deal with lots of prospects like Fitsit. But if I was at a budget strapped startup, I would just get a bare bones warehouse. I'd call it a Redshift, a BigQuery, maybe a Snowflake if you want. I would get the cheapest ETL tool you can. I think it's Stitch would be the one now. I know that Segment has some pretty okay ETL for free, with some quirks, and then Airbyte, of course, is coming up and being quite cheap as well. And that would be really it. And then you can work on manipulating some of that information. And, a tool like Census has their startup friendly plans where you pay a little bit of money and you're able to move that information across. So that would be the cheapest way. I think you can do that with less than $100-$200. Oscar's typing, and Oscar definitely has some good input here, I know for sure. Thank you for joining, Oscar.
Let's see what Oscar is saying. Very nice free tier. BigQuery is a very nice free tier. Oscar. I was going to say, like, they also give you like credits galore. Like, you just raise your hand.
The startup credits.
I'm just a small company. Please help me, and they'll just throw like $2,000, $5,000 credits at you. So that could last you very long.
I won't give all the details, but the credits that we got, Culture Amp, at our size from Google is pretty insane. I don't think anybody on Google is on this call, but yeah, they were pretty nice to us. So yeah, Google's credit system is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think from a stack point of view, I agree with you. Like, there's a lot of like ETL, like cheap ETL too nowadays. Like, I think it's like qualities continue to go high, and like price continue to go low. Warehouse, the same thing. I think the thing I would say before moving to Vincent's second question and like context here is how do you, is there something you prioritize, right? Like, because I think that's something that I see all the time at Census is like people are like, I want to move to a hub and spoke model. Like, should I just spend my time of like replicating all of the data from all my core sources into the warehouse, right? So like kind of like going from left to right, it's like ingest everything, transform everything, and then finally, like syncing everything back to Salesforce, whatever. Or, do you do like horizontally speaking? So it's like, I'm going to take the product data from my Postgres DB, dump into BigQuery, do a bit of cleaning, do a bit of join on like, classic identity resolution problem with like join on domains, email address, all that fun stuff, right? And then sync it back to Salesforce to do some simple like product usage. Like, what's your recommended approach here? Like,
I mean, it's funny. Oscar's still tidying and we'll have good information. I'm a business student and I sort of self-taught myself SQL. So I don't have too much advice on the warehouse side of things, but that is the beginning point for most companies. It's product data. And my advice is, learn a little bit of SQL because the product data will be okay. And just don't get stuck behind a queue in the product team to get stuff done. So like you described, Sil, like get a copy of the Postgres database and you can put it anywhere you like. And it's pretty easy to do that. And then buy something that is reverse ETL orientated, probably Census, to do very light manipulation in the warehouse. You don't necessarily need DBT in the early days to do all that sort of stuff. And you can do it all with drive tables in your warehouse. And then you just lean into that and you get more sophisticated. And it's a little bit parallel, but something in my role, because I'm working with Salesforce so closely. As you get bigger, you're going to need to evolve your analytics warehouse. You're going to need to put Salesforce data in there. And I think the key point of the difference between iPaaS and reverse ETL is, with reverse ETL, you can have the same things that people look at day in, day out on your BI dashboards be also the thing that powers your SaaS applications to create that source of truth, and you're doing the same things. And so from that standpoint, I think you'll evolve into that sophistication, and your analytics layer will save you as a RevOps professional from complicating your Salesforce instance so much. Time and time again, I get these requests from sales leaders like, hey, can I measure how quickly we're responding to our inbound leads? And I think 5 years ago, a RevOps professional would go and do all sorts of crazy builds in Salesforce or HubSpot to try to timestamp and date stamp this stuff to get to this answer for their sales leader when really all the information is at rest. And I know we're pivoting from the subject here, but that's where you get to that level of sophistication Vincent, I think like start with the bare bones, and then as you start to get these complicated questions, then your need for a true analytics layer and a DBT or a BI tool will come up.
Yeah, and I think like what I recommend to people when they come to Census with this similar kind of like question of like, I'm a team of one, I can't really write SQL, like that type of things, right? Like usually what I say is like, well, first of all, there's like lots of tools today are like, managed by the platform. Like, BigQuery is not, we're not talking about Hadoop like 10 years, 15 years ago, right? It's like there's a nice UI, you don't have to maintain deployment and all that stuff. Like you do have to, write SQL, but like all those tools are like pretty good at like managing themselves. There's even like higher level abstraction on those things. Like, if you don't want to manage like the 5-trend or like the ETL side and the warehouse things, like the warehouse side, you can use like Mozart Data. Panoply is another one that is kind of like ETL and warehouse in a box type of thing, right? And so like at that point, you almost driving like a classic UI, like you don't see any line of code. You will have to write some SQL. And so, I'm a big proponent that every ops people should know how to write SQL.
Yeah. If you join this because you're in RevOps and you're interested in Census, like I think one of the biggest things that helped me in my career is learning basic SQL. So just find somebody willing to give you that time at a company. It's no better to use it on your own, to learn it on your own data. But it'll help you think about how you build systems strategically and intelligently for your entire revenue org.
Yeah, and also there's like I would say this, I was talking to a very small company, probably like you, Vincent, was like, team of one, and the person was like, I think he was on Mozart Data or something like that from like the tech stack, and he was using Upwork to get someone to write query for him. So he just went to Upwork. He's like, I don't know how to write complex query, but like I hold my data there, and so he was just asking questions like, I want to have my table, and he was sharing spreadsheets with that person, be like, these are the results.
Like
this is kind of like, it looks like this. Can you query the data to make sure it fits this model? And then they were pushing it back to Salesforce or HubSpot. So like that's a cheaper way where you don't have to write SQL. Like you need to have that trust with that person, but like it's a good workaround, I would say.
They don't even need credentials to your warehouse. Just give them the column names and they'll be good enough to do it. That's a hard question, Oscar. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like the question, I mean, the answer, I mean, I get that, like putting my sales hat on here for 30 seconds, like we do get those questions a lot. And I think sometimes it's like you get both at the same time, right? Like for me, it's like Segment is like a great tool to do like real-time use cases, event tracking. I think that's fantastic. I think Segment Persona is like a great, way to get you going of thinking of like, how do I model my data? How do I aggregate event? Like, I want to get the last time someone did an event, like very timestamp based type of like tooling. And that kind of start opening your mind and the team and the company of like, how can we do things more with data? But at one point you want to go to like, raw SQL, custom code, like, multi-object association, like, something a lot more complicated. And so I feel for me, it's like, Segment is the entryway, the same way Google Analytics is the entryway to like Amplitude, right? It's like you go for nothing, Google Analytics, Amplitude, whatever, and then you end up to like BI world. I feel like it's Segment in a way. It's that way for Persona, and then Segment is a great event tracking tool. Like when we talk to customer at Census and they're like, we have Segment. I'm like, that's great. That means you have tons of product usage data. We can do great things with that. Like it's helpful.
I mean, this space that you're in, Sil, I think if you go to the blog pages of Census or any of their competitors, there's a couple of blog posts on why the CDP is dead, and there's lots of answers there. But I mean, I cheated, Oscar. I brought up our notes of when we were looking at Census, and I have a chapter on Segment. And I think like there's lots of reasons in my mind of why you wouldn't want to just do that. I think it's the SQL traits features in Segment is pretty limiting. They'll charge you an arm and a leg to use it as well, I believe. And so how you can manipulate data in Segment with other system data is really, really challenging. But if you want to just pass on raw event data, you can do it. it's that filtering that I was talking about as well. Maybe you don't want to send all those events in, and I think Segment can do that, but there's some niceties there. And then being able to mix it with other information is really, really, really challenging in Segment in my mind. But yeah, I'm just looking at my notes from this one. I also know the destinations. Events it'll be fine as well. But that would be really it. It's the combination, and the SQL trace feature of Segment is super limited.
Yeah, even just not Segment, but CDP at large, usually it's like, and you know, they're adapting to like the warehouse native world, like for sure, because you know, like more and more company out there like investing into warehouse because the bar is so low, as we talked to Vincent about, like, you know, you can get $500 of credits and on BigQuery with a small data set that could last you a year, right? It's like basically free or cheap. And the thing with CDP is also like they were built for an event-based world, right? Like, so a lot of the time when you go to a CDP, like in particular, and you know, might not be true today, but like back in the day when I was playing around with it, it was like to build like the user model. It's you do a lot of like aggregation of event, right? So it's like, hey, if you want to know which plan Ben is on, you're gonna basically build a query that's like get the last plan name from the last payment event, right? And so it's like, if you forget to fire an event or something like that, well, you're gonna miss the information, right? Which is when it's like SQL based, it's like batch based, query based. You can always recreate the past. You can rebuild traits, and you don't have to be at the mercy of like sending an event to them and to make sure the last value is updated, kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of like that front.
Exactly, but back to Oscar's question for raw events, you know, I think that it's a reasonable option. Like if you don't need to do too much, it's pretty much there. But you'll be limited to what is in that tool and how that's done. And I think if you want to bring in one other attribute to enrich that event to help you with your downstream tool, it's going to be pretty hard as well.
And then you have Segment for like event tracking at Culture. Is that something you see? Like, have you ever looked at like other solution like Snowplow and things like that, like on that front from an event tracking point?
We did look at Snowplow for a little bit. I can't remember what the rationale was. I think we have we're in a bit of a weird situation where we use Segment on our website to track you know, our marketing visitors, and we use Amplitude within our product. And I think you know, we have a high bar for security, and I think like the tracking plans that we can implement between our website and in our product is vastly different. And that's kind of where it is. But we'd like to move to a world where we had Segment in both, and maybe replay them down to Amplitude. I think the use cases are many. I mean, just this week, you know, we were looking at we're big enough now. We have thousands of customers, and we have all these inbound inquiries who are customer accounts. And then the question's like, well, how many of these are support requests on our contact sales button? And it's like, there's a lot, right? And that's where having Segment across both is useful, because you can divert people and change the website based on that pretty easily, if they're logged in, and vice versa. But yeah, right now we've got a split, mainly for privacy and security reasons.
Yeah, I guess to piggyback on that kind of like, you know, rollout and security is like, how do we roll out new data? Like, you know, so okay, cool, you have your warehouse connected to Salesforce, and then you know, you ship a new feature or a new thing. Like, how do you roll out that data to just like turn it off and on and say, all right, well, the sales team will figure it out what that field is? Like, do you do crazy enablement? Like, what the process looks like nowadays at Culture?
I saw Ray from our team, and he's still on the line. I think like I got to give credit to Ray for a lot of this in the product analytics team. It's come a long way, where a new feature or a new product is shipped, and you know, more or less instinctively, our product managers know to collaborate with our product management team, our product analytics team, and so they're creating the tracking plan. They're defining what is the important metric for adoption for this, and then very soon we have what's called a star metric. I don't know a lot about it, but how it's presented internally is pretty incredible, because it's this one metric for this feature or this product that everybody can rally behind, both product managers and customer success. Maybe Ray has a link he can share around these star metrics and how they think about it. But from that point on, it's pretty amazing the velocity we've got to from feature being built or product being built to making some sort of adoption metric available. And it's usually in the same format. It's usually integer based, sometimes date based, and our customer success team know that when a star metric comes in, it's something that they should care about. And so that's, it's pretty remarkable in terms of how that works. It's really built into a pretty nice process where I remember not so long ago where, we had a pretty brand new product where we were crying out for adoption metrics for many, many months, maybe even years, that we were sort of in the blind on. And, I think it was just the other week where we launched this new feature where we probably had tracking in place before we even made it available to our customers, which was just like a mind-blowing moment to reflect on compared to where we were like 2 years ago.
But like, do you like, because you mentioned that at the beginning, like, exposing the right data. So it's like, is that magic star metric is like something that is being built by the product team, and it's like, yeah, this is what matters. It's like this kind of like engagement score as feature, or is that like something that you took to the sales team, like, kind of like almost like a user interview? It's like, hey, sales team, like we're going at these things, what matters to you? Or sales team can be sales leader or CS leader, right? And then you work in tandem, or it's like very much like product team say, this is how you measure engagement on this feature. This is the only thing you need to know. And then, you basically push it to the sales team and get enablement training and be done with it. Like, what's the, like, what's the, like?
It's, no, I can think of one example here where it's, a lot of the time you suffix a lot of your metrics with last 180 days or last 360 days and stuff like that. And I think like we do trust our product managers and the product analytics team to guide them, but sometimes there is this disconnect where we have to slightly twist them. And that's where Ray is very helpful, where like, it might make sense on an aggregate level as a product manager to look at something in a rolling last 90 days. Let's call it performance reviews last 90 days. Why not? That makes sense. Let's just see how we're going in terms of that. But when you go down to an account level, these metrics might not stack up. You're trying to look at the adoption on this account. Actually, I'm happy if they've done this thing in the last 360 days. So there is a little bit of a difference, but as you get to this maturity, as long as you're modeling things correctly in your analytics layer, you can actually surface different things. It can be the same underlying metric, just twisted a little bit different, where it works on an account level basis compared to a macro view where we look at our entire customer base. So we do, to answer the question, we put a lot of trust in the product managers because we know that they're engaging with customers in their day-to-day anyway, and they know what's important with them. But sometimes there's this disconnect where what we look at on the product side isn't necessarily right for on the customer side.
And do you see a lot of like what does the iteration look like, right? Like to your point, it's like people, like, because that's the thing that I see time and time again out there. People like, they have the mythical spreadsheet with like, this is the metrics, last 180 days, definition, all that stuff. Go to market, we ship it, and then like as soon as it hit production or like in Salesforce, right? Like that spreadsheet is already out of date and it will never be maintained. Like, so how do you go back to, hey, we actually find out that last 365 days is the most, like the best time frame, or like, like this is like, do you like, how do you iterate that at Culture?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think it's really just, there is the RevOps team in the middle there, I think, to help iterate on it and be that layer of defense where it's, here's the product team thinking about it this way. You've got a RevOps layer who's quite SQL sophisticated, who can engage with that team and then come back and iterate on it and give communication back and forth. But it's, thankfully, we don't need to do too many rounds of iteration on that one, generally.
Got it. Okay. On Roz, ask a question. Hello, let me read it out loud. So what advice would you have for RevOps people deciding what layer to put certain logic in? For example, you might have all these in parallels, like you have data warehouse models, you have like, writing query in Census, like you can still like just write query there, iPaaS tools, like, just SaaS tools, like, Salesforce is like where I do all my, logic. Like what's your recommendation? Or how do you do it at Culture, and what's your recommendation, I guess?
We're big enough now where I like to say I don't want any logic in Census, but that's once you get big enough, and that's totally fine. But if I was a lot smaller and you were a smaller team where you don't need to have GitHub and change management and know what's changing, you can write raw queries in Census. That's absolutely fine, because when you come back to it, it's going to be simple. It's only going to be slightly complicated, and there's only one or two or maybe three people managing it. I think as you get bigger and multiple things are changing, the stakes get higher, you certainly want to start considering that data warehouse model. So that's how I would distinct those two. It's really just size. But trust me, we still write some SQL and Census because things need to happen quickly, and it terrifies me, but that's what we do. And then
do you do anything in Salesforce? Do you do anything in Salesforce? Like, do you what do you have running in Process Builder? Like
yeah,
do you still do some transform there?
I have a pretty firm philosophy on this, right? So I think if it needs external data, it's got to go out to the warehouse. In my mind, I'm not combining product data in crazy ways in Salesforce. It's got to be done outside. Like that's pretty clear. If it's just only Salesforce data and it needs to be inside the tool, I also want to confine it into the walls of Salesforce. Like I love what you're doing at Census, but you've given a bazooka to RevOps people where, I'm hearing these stories of RevOps people pulling it out, putting it in a warehouse, modeling it, doing crazy things, and it's just Salesforce data on this loop. And it's like, if any of those tools go down or somebody does something, you're at high risk, and it's going to really hurt you when it comes to Salesforce development later down the line because you've got too many blind spots. But the way that I think about it with Salesforce manipulation is if it's something that needs to be real time and it's to help the daily job or the jobs to be done of a standard user within there, let's call it an SDR, an AE, an AM, or a customer success manager, keep it in there. More than likely,
what's an example of that? Like, can you top of your
head?
Yeah,
territories. Territories would be a good one. Like if you think about, hey, you've got a country, an industry, a size, and that can change. People get new information and they put that information in, and you need to rerun the territory. Like that would be a disaster to put that information into your warehouse and introduce latency and all those things. Whereas we at CultureAmp, in DBT land, they call it a seed file. We have many seed files in Salesforce where perhaps those territory logics exist, right? But we know that we can run it in real time if something changes. So that would be an example. The other example is like response time, where it's like, does this SDR need to know their response time in Salesforce live? Probably not. Is it something that we can calculate in the BI layer relatively easy? And is it only for a manager to look at? That's where I go, maybe we should calculate response time and present it in the BI tool. But I honestly think that as a person who needs to run sales ops and systems and Salesforce, I think I've failed in that if I have to send, and we're not PLG, I think that's different if you're PLG, but I think I've failed if you've got SDRs and AEs going to a BI tool to get their information. And that's where Census, of course, comes in.
And well, I guess you almost like, I'll challenge you on the territory. Like, is it like breaking your own rules? Like, because it's like, taking data from two sources, like account ownership and like enrich firmographic, like, it's like, is Census an SMB company? Well, depending on like how we enrich it, like, or do you feel like you're doing enrich in Salesforce and so therefore it's like live in Salesforce? Like what's your...
Well, it's there. It's true. It is enriched in Salesforce and it is there. That's true. Okay. But the real timeness, I think the latency is a big one, right? Like, okay, account created. I know that Clearbit's going to get there pretty quick and do it. I can't have anybody waiting 2 hours, and so that one does work. But at the same time, when I rank the importance of the data for a territory, I value what a Clearbit gives me, for example. But if they're on the phone with somebody and they say, "Oh, I were actually 400 employees," that's number one. That's the most important thing. That's first party information, and so that's going to override whatever this enrichment tool gives us.
Got it. And so I guess question for you, like I'm sure you advise company out there in Australia, in SF, right? Like kind of like what's your go-to recommendation was like, hey, I'm a 50, 100 employee company, we're going from phase 1 to phase 2. Like, we have many tools. We just hire, basically we have VPs of everything and everybody wants to build their own little castle. Like, sales team is like Salesforce number 1, Zendesk number 1. Like everybody's like, I want my own thing. And then you the new RevOps person there. Like, what's your kind of like go-to recommendation to deliver, like value data to those different teams, right? Like, what's your go-to?
I'm gonna put it in the chat. I don't know. Before I hit send, do people still send around Tristan Handy's article from 2017, the Startup Founder's Guide to Analytics? You know that one?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think they still do that.
Send that around to everybody. I think, right? Like, I think that was there's all these like really important articles over the time within this space. Like, I think going back to like Stitch, where like engineers shouldn't write ETL code, right? That was another big one. This, in my mind, sort of is a fantastic article that just talks to the journey of what needs to happen, because what's going to happen when you're 50 or 100 people is people's got different experiences. They're coming from companies with different backgrounds, and there's just an iteration here where you've got to start small, and you've got to build towards it. And I think, that would be my advice, is like, just take it one step at a time. And don't go too crazy with advanced things. Don't bring in all this different technology. Start at the bottom. I really think that that's a good one.
Thanks for sharing too, Oscar, the links, and we'll send the links later on into follow-up emails. I think so. Last question on that front was, so I met with someone who does a lot of like kind of like consulting for companies to set up their stack, things like that, and like she was saying that one of the biggest things she does is like the first 2 weeks she goes to a company, is like, hey, this is my first week at the company. She said, I'm going to provide, this is the menu of everything I can do, like for you, like, like build stack, provide you reports, like analytics, all that stuff. And then she goes to all the leaders and she said, like, this is what I can do. The person who build me the biggest wish list is the person I'm going to spend my next 12 months with. Everybody else, I'll just let it burn because I can only do one thing well. Like, I thought that was very extreme, but I was like, that's actually pretty good way to say no to a lot of things and to keep focused. Like, do you agree with that, or that approach, or not really?
To go after the loudest voice in the room? No. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, not loudest voice, but like the people who have the most needs, like not like the loudest person. It's like, if you go to a VP sales, like the VP says, like, I just want all the data, but they don't know what that means. Like, you can like discard them. But like, she was saying like she was go to a team, and the sales team was like, well, we need to have like the product usage because we have tons of trials and we don't have a team like that large enough team to go through all the leads. And then, we have a big upsell motion, and right now we have no idea how to do the upsells. And we want to do reporting on this. And so people could describe their needs, and it could map to like like business outcome, right? And so she was like, I'm just going to serve those people basically. But she makes a conscious decision to just work with one org for 6 months, and there's like, oh, CS team, you don't know what you ask for. Well, you can eat the crumbs from the sales team, basically, if I'm with the sales team.
I mean, I'm pretty averse of that approach, and I think like I sit within a RevOps org, and I think that's the importance of RevOps. Like, you're never gonna, with most companies, you're not gonna have a sales analytics team who can just service that. And I think that's, if you're in RevOps, your role is to be able to like weight the business impact ranking on all of those ones and the urgency of all of those items, and you need to work on the things that have the highest impact and have the highest urgency. And by limiting yourself to one org, you're not going to have the impact you want to have on the business. And to do that, there's so many prioritization matrices and all of those things, and they're super hard to do. That's your role to try to do that and work with senior leaders. But it is really hard if it's siloed senior leaders, like to get a chief sales officer to agree with a chief marketing officer that this one thing is more important. That's the tricky thing for RevOps professionals all the time.
And do you like follow-up question on this, I guess, is like, what's your opinion on like reactive, proactive work? Like, like when you work with the team around you, is like, hey, this is like 60% of our time are going to be roadmap building, or are you like, we literally just do reactive work? Like, it's like everybody
we're
else.
Pretty reactive right now. Like we're now big enough with sort of program management, and we have a planning process, and we are having some really hard conversations, but there is a lot of reactiveness right now. But I think you've just got to always have that space for that, both as analytics turns into, analytics, you're always gonna have a broken report or dashboard that's urgent, that something comes in, and same with reverse ETL and operational analytics. You're gonna have to do things pretty quickly, so always have that buffer. Like, you just need to have it, otherwise you're gonna tire people out. But yeah, it's a tough balance. There's no right or wrong here, but just keep a buffer. That's my only advice.
Okay, cool. I don't think there's that many more questions. I mean, I could go on for hours here, but like, I'm conscious of time here too. Katie, how are we doing there?
Yeah, we had so many great questions that we're out of time.
Great.
That's good.
Well, if you're, thank you for that. I think, Oscar, thank you for staffing the chat so well. If you're in Australia and have questions about analytics as a whole, talk to Oscar. That's my advice. I'm happy to answer them, but I might defer you to Oscar. But yeah.
Well, then, yeah, thanks for having us. We'll send everything. I mean, Katie will wrap up, but like, if you have any more questions, just feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, emails, all that good stuff. Everything will be in the next follow-up email. But Katie, take it away.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Ben and Sil, for your time. Thank you for everyone who asked questions and contributed in the chat. We'll send out these slides as well as the recording. The recording will always be accessible through Livestorm, where you logged in for the webinar, just in case you want to share that or watch on demand. And one last plug to join our data practitioner Slack community. It's powered by Census, but independent from Census. It's really a place for data and ops practitioners to get together, learn from their peers, and talk about any data issues they have. And we're running some events every month to help the data community get together, both in person and virtually. So thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate your time. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.